All right, so a lot of these teams this year have a lot going on, right? The Browns, I mean, new quarterback, everything else has been going on with the team. The Steelers, new quarterback, Kenny Pickett mania, whatever they doing down there with that. And then the Ravens, I mean, they're still trying to figure out if they're going to sign their quarterback long term in the North. But the one team, it's kind of just been sitting, chilling, watching everybody else move while they don't feel like they have to is the former, well, the current and reigning AFC and AFC North champion, Cincinnati Bengals. And to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals, I bring in the always good Ace Boogie in, from AFC North Talk. Ace, man, what's it like to be on the drama-free team this year in the North?
Man, it's been quite an experience because usually we go into it as kind of the underdogs. Nobody wants to come to Cincinnati kind of thing, which changed a little bit when Joe Burrow got there, but it still wasn't at the height that it's at now. Now, when you see guys like Lyle Collins, like, yeah, dog, I'll take $6 million a year to play with Joe Burrow. It's just really put the Bengals in a different kind of space, I would say, this offseason. You talk about them being able to take away a guy like Ted Karras that's played with Tom Brady before, another guy, Alex Kappa, that chose to come to Joe Burrow over staying in Tampa with Tom Brady. You talk about, wow, this is kind of crazy. But the thing that I think makes the most sense is they're also watching, like you said, the other teams where it comes to a Cleveland Browns where you guys go out and get Deshaun, or it goes to a Buffalo Bills where they go out and get Von Miller. And the Bengals just really have focused on trying to get rid of their biggest weaknesses. Offensive line, it's no secret after Joe Burrow was hit 70 plus times last year. The offensive line has been a priority. So they've been doing that. And now with us being in this kind of third wave of free agency, I like to kind of call it, after you have cut downs and stuff like that, they're also out looking for other pieces to solidify the roster. So it has been drama free. I mean, there was a bit of drama with the appendectomy. Like, a lot of people were like overlooking that, and there were some people talking about, hey, why aren't the Bengals playing starters in the preseason? And there was a little bit of drama at the left guard position because that was a position that had a lot of question marks. You talk about Jackson Carmen, right? But it seems like Volson has pretty much won that job. So we are kind of heading into, after getting over those two road bumps in the offseason, kind of a stress free, kind of, or drama free offseason.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch the Bengals move and the league move around it because it's like when Joe Burrow made that Super Bowl, the closest thing in sports it reminded me of was like when LeBron made the finals in '07, and then all of a sudden Boston was like, we gotta get KG and Ray. You know what I mean? Like it was like, oh, that new thing here already. It's time to form, right? Before he becomes unstoppable, and that's kind of what it felt like the league did in response to just seeing, Jamar and Joe Burrow in their first year be able to be so dominant on offense. Like two teams did a good job against them the whole year. You know what I mean? Like it was something crazy like that. And now I mean, what they played together for 3 years. This would be their fourth year playing together, second year in the NFL. It's hard to imagine that chemistry can get any better. But do you see maybe your coach does stuff offensively to kind of make that even more of a threat? Like it's hard to imagine he can be much better than what he was his rookie year. But
Right,
again, it was his rookie year,
right.
so there is always the possibility that he could be better. What do you think year two with Joe Burrow and Jamar looks like? Do you think they try some new wrinkles, or do you think it's going to be more of the same?
Yeah, I think you will see some wrinkles because a lot of what they were doing last year was based off of not having an offensive line. So it's almost a miracle that they were able to capture that off of that, right? You couldn't really do play action with our offensive line. You couldn't wait for routes to develop with that offensive line. So I think this year you'll definitely see them install some more aspects of that. I would say Jamar Chase is going to be better this year than he was last year. And I think it's just from the confidence that he's displayed. Year one is down. He knows what to expect in the NFL. It was crazy because I was talking to his dad last season, and this was like after he was tearing it up. And he was like, yeah, he's still learning the NFL. He was like, you might not believe it, like, but he's still learning at that point. And I think every receiver goes through that because you got to kind of get used to the speed of the NFL. You got to get used to how the corners play you. And I think that he's definitely looking like he could go to another level this season. I know one of the things this offseason that he said that he was working on was his conditioning. He actually did like a lot of running because Jamar is a guy where he doesn't need a bunch of targets to have a bunch of yards and touchdowns. Like he can get that in a microcosm. Like he only had like what, like 80 receptions or something last year, or 80 targets or something like that, or 100 targets I think, but 80 receptions last year and still had the 1,400 yards. So he's a guy that doesn't need that many targets, but he talked about not wanting to come off the field. He like wants to get every opportunity and make sure that he's in shape to do that. And so it'll be interesting. They did some stuff with him that was kind of Debo Samuel-esque in some games where he was in the backfield lining up, taking like reverses and stuff like that. You might see more of that. But yeah, I think they can go to another level. But when I say that, it's probably like 1,500 or 1,600 yards in terms of that. So it's not much better because he already was amazing last year. But I think that those would be the new wrinkles as far as progressive passes. And I think with Jamar Chase, that's the area that I think that he's going to improve on next season.
Get them Debo Samuel plays in on his rookie deal because the only time you gonna be able to get away with it is during the first 2 years where he's like, I'll do anything to win, coach. And
Right.
then that year three, year four goes by, he's like, I'm Jamar Chase. I do not
Right.
have to do this. Yeah, I
The
remember
one thing he is kind of like very confident, right? Like, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but he also is like, you know how some guys that are like that, they don't even block, right? Like this
mm-hmm.
man was going down the field throwing blocks in like a Lions game. So even though he's like most people would consider like those guys a diva. Like I was like, damn, like Chase is down here throwing blocks. Like he is kind of like at a point where he might not be too afraid to get his hands dirty in that stuff. But I think, like you said, the Debo Samuel thing, I don't know, that stirred up a lot of stuff. They might
Yeah.
not be able to get away with it for too long.
Well, it's like them Louisiana dudes, they love to block. Like I don't think I've ever seen that Louisiana LSU wide receiver that's like doesn't like to block. Because even Odell, people don't think Odell blocks because like they have the image of him. Odell nasty down the field when it comes to blocking. And Jarvis is just as nasty as him. But one of the things I remember, Odell was like, "Yeah, man, you could give Jarvis them little backfield routes. I'm not doing none of that. I'm not lining up and running back. I'm not giving you the impression that I'm going up the middle. Nah, dog. Nah, it's too late in my year. I'm on my second deal. I'm not doing any of that. So this it's just a smart thing. By the time you get to that second deal, Jamar gonna be running routes, and that's all. Debo not doing that stuff no more, right? After he got
Right.
his money, he's like, oh yeah,
Oh,
by the
for
way,
sure.
part of this deal is you're not making me do this because you want me to make up for Jimmy Garoppolo. But yeah, it's interesting when you look at that offense. I mean, like when I look at Pittsburgh, Baltimore, I go, okay, I know their defense is going to be good. With Cincinnati, it's like there's no way that offense is going to be bad, right? Unless like something catastrophic happens, which we never wish on anybody. They're going to be, because they had a bad offensive line last year and they were one of the best offenses, or at least explosive offenses in the NFL. If we could switch sides here on the defensive side of the ball. What are the questions that Bengals fans really have about this defense? What are the concerns there, and how do you feel like the team has addressed them?
So honestly, I don't really think that there are a ton of concerns for the Bengals defense because when I watched them last year, a lot of people don't realize this. Like the defense was actually the more consistent unit that bailed the offense out a lot. When you talk about the offense having turnovers, especially in the game where Joe Burrow had, I think, 3 interceptions, they held teams to three, or sometimes they ended up getting a turnover. On the defense, it's more so, and I hate to put him out here because I'm confident in him. It's likely probably Eli Apple in that corner depth that they have there. They've been hit up there for the most part. They did a great job at hiding Eli Apple. They never asked him to play man last year. It was a lot of zone. And so I would say he's probably the only slight question mark. I think a bigger question mark actually might be three tech, right? Because you had Larry Ogunjobi there last year. He gave you 7.5 sacks. But you also had BJ Hill, who filled in limited time and gave you 5. But you got to be asking, can BJ Hill and Zach Carter match that production that BJ Hill and Larry Ogunjobi gave you last year? And I
Mm.
think that that's a big question mark. The other question mark I would probably say is who are the Bengals going to have opposite of Trey Hendrickson, right? Like Sam Hubbard's a great player, elite run defender, hasn't been a guy that's like, I'm going to threaten and have 10 plus sacks, right? Like they think that Joseph Osai can be that guy, but Joseph Osai is coming off of a knee injury. So I think that that depth and who can kind of support Hendrickson on that other side is definitely a question. I think that's even a bigger question more so than Eli Apple. But the depth after Eli Apple is definitely a question mark because they drafted Cam Taylor Britt. This was a kid that they expected to come in and really challenge Eli for that top position, that second corner. Kind of got off to a bumpy start, started to show some signs of possibly improving, but still hadn't overtaken Eli, and then ends up with a core injury that I think is going to prompt them to put him on IR, right? So you're talking about a situation now where he's not there, and the Bengals have had to actually have a guy by Alan George, who is an undrafted free agent who really flashed and played really solid for them in the preseason, but he's like corner number 5, right? It really corner, I think, yeah, the corner number 5 for them, right? So they've got some question marks there because I believe Eli Apple also had an injury. It's been said to me from Zim, I think, that he talked to Eli. Eli said that he's good to go this season. So they're going to be okay there, but I still think that they need to look out right now as these cuts have happened and add like potentially another corner to that mix with the Cam Taylor Britt news becoming official that he is going on IR because he's going to miss 4 games because of that.
Yeah, yeah. The Bengals are a really fascinating team. I can look at them and go, on paper, there's a lot of reasons why this can work. From you, from an analyst standpoint, are there things that because every year we go into it wanting to be more optimistic than not necessarily saying we're being positive for positive sake, but if it's a half empty, if it's a half full glass, you were going to look at it half full. When you put on your pessimist hat for the Bengals, what do you feel like if these things go wrong for this team, what that can really affect their chances of being able to have a repeat performance or even better?
We're just talking about all around, or
Mm-hmm.
just all around. It would have to be if you're letting Joe Burrow get hit. If the offensive line once again is not good, he just can't sustain that many hits. Right? You're talking about not only this last season, you're talking about the season before that. Like Joe Burrow's been hit a lot of times, and the fact that he is essentially the foundation and lifeline, that is something that you have to protect. So if you can't protect him, that has potential for issues there. If the secondary, if something happens and we end up having a situation like we did, I think that was 2020, where like our secondary was just decimated, that could definitely take us out of there. Outside of that, I would think that that would be the only thing.
It's going to be interesting to see what the Bengals do this year. How are you feeling about the Bengals? I don't know if you're ready for predictions yet,
Yeah,
but what are you predicting for them?
I think I think they're going back, man. Like a lot of people don't realize like as soon as they drafted Joe Burrow, this entire team changed, right? Like it wasn't really a shock to me last year. Now, I'm not gonna say Super Bowl, but it wasn't a shock for me to for them to go to the playoffs because a lot of those games that he was in, we were in a lot of those games. Like they only lost by like 2 or 3 points. It would be, something here. He was learning to win and the whole attitude of like the team changed. And I think the Bengals, I have to give a lot of credit to the front office. They've done a great job of using Joe as a tool to bring other players to the team. And they've done a good job of surrounding him with weapons for success. So for me, I feel like what they did this offseason, things are changing. I mean, we talked about it before the show, Paycor Stadium now. Like Mike Brown is changing on a lot of things that he used to do. Like there's a Ring of Honor now. They didn't have that for the longest. So the culture has pretty much changed. And I think like we've seen it now to have Joe Burrow and the impact that you have when you have a franchise changing quarterback, I feel like we're seeing it. So for me, based off of what they did, like I'm not gonna lie, bro. It's gonna sound like I'm just drinking Bengals juice. It is going to be scary to see who can stop Joe Burrow with the offensive line. Like I've been saying, that was the main reason that I was on the Panay Sewell train. Cause I was like, if this dude just gets some time and doesn't have two guys in his lap, like what is gonna happen? And so for me, I think the goal for them is to get back. And in a weird way, I think losing the Super Bowl gave them that hunger and gave the front office that hunger, because if you win a Super Bowl with Joe Burrow with no offensive line, they're going to be like, oh, we don't need a line. We don't need to sign Lyle Collins. We don't need to sign Ted Karras.
But
We don't need to sign Alex Capel. We did all of that.
but him going out getting sacked, right, is exactly why they're like, oh well, yeah, guess they had a point, right?
Right. So I think if this team stays healthy, I think that they'll be right in the thick of it to try to defend that AFC championship. But we got to stay healthy. We got to get through the season. And as long as we're somewhat healthy, I think that we should be fine. But I do think that they could go back, because when I'm hearing, like, it's just crazy to me, because I'm looking around and going through the AFC and going through the playoffs that we did last year and being on Spaces. I remember how some of those other fan bases were. And like the disrespect this season that people are just like dismissing the Chiefs is just crazy to me. Like I understand that the Bills are good, but like the Bills haven't really proved anything. They couldn't beat the Chiefs. We'll have to play them this season, but I just couldn't, for me, put them over. I couldn't put the Bills over the Chiefs. Like,
Yeah.
that's Andy Reid, dog. That's Pat Mahomes over there. So
Well, and it's like, as much as they want to give Lamar flack for not winning the playoffs, I mean, like Josh Allen's record's not that much better, and it's like he ain't never beat the Chiefs, right? Like, I mean, they lost to the Chiefs now 2 years in a row. What, AFC Championship game
the
2020.
craziest part about that, right, is everybody made such a huge deal about the overtime rule, right? They changed the overtime rule. The Bengals were literally in the same position the next week. Our defense just stood tall, dog. Like, it is what it is. And I think like a lot of them try to use that as a caveat. Well, if it was different overtime rules, we would have beat the Chiefs. And it's like, nah, I gotta see it, dog. I gotta see it actually happen. I gotta see you go into Arrowhead, and I gotta see you slay the Dragon and Pat Mahomes before I'm ready to crown you. And so I think it'll be super competitive this season. But the one thing that I learned about last year, sometimes it's not about having the number one seed. It's not about having the number two seed. It's about having the best path to get to the playoffs. Like if you can try to avoid having to play, I don't know, the Bills and the Chiefs, and then you got to play a third team, like that's the best path. Like give me Ryan Tannehill and give me Derek Carr, and then give me Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen to do it that way. But I think the way that this is going to be so competitive this season, you just going to have to get in it. You just going to have to get in the trenches and try to see who comes out on top. But I am very confident in the Bengals.
Yeah, I think the worst seed to be in this year is going to be the 2 seed, because, I mean, what are the possibilities? You play, it's probably going to be what? Oakland? Well, not Oakland. I keep calling them Oakland. The Raiders in there with Devontae Adams and Derek Carr. That would be the most preferable one. Or it's Russ in the Broncos, whatever that turns out to be. Or it's a late charging Cleveland Browns with like a warmed up Deshaun Watson, which I don't think people are going to want to play once they see it on the field. Yeah. So, like, could you imagine you're the 2 seed, you're like Tennessee or somebody, and you get the 2 seed, and is that you get the Browns or something like that, or like the Browns and the Bengals get into like a weird tiebreaker situation, and the loser of the division ends up being the 6 or 7 seed, and it's like, oh, your choices are either the Browns and Deshaun, or you get the defending AFC champion. You know what I mean? Or the Chiefs don't win that division because there's so many good teams in that division, the AFC West, and then they end up being a wild card team. There's no winning in this situation. Like, you just got to hope that you get one team's going to make the playoffs without a good quarterback. It happens every year. You just hope you're that team that plays them, or you have the bye. You know what I mean? But
Right.
it's all about the path. I've been saying this for a while. You want to get hot at the right time in the NFL season. I know it sounds silly, but when you start out and you hot right away, like Pittsburgh was in 2020 or Baltimore was in 2019, it usually leads to disappointment in the postseason because it's like you played your best football too early. So the Bengals, they got hot at the right time, had a great path, and then for whatever reason, I mean, they swept the Chiefs last year. Like, it's not like a fluke that they beat them in the playoffs because they beat them in the regular season to get to the division and to put them in that position. So they earned it. So it's interesting to see what they're going to do here. I mean, Joe Burrow continues to fascinate me because he's just so good. And it's like night over day, right? From 2018 to 2019, he's just been a different human being at quarterback. And, you know, it's also interesting to think he has a really good wide receiving core now. Mm-hmm. I'll be watching them old LSU games. Did he have a better one at LSU? Like, I don't know who was there when he was at Ohio State, but they usually have good wide receivers. I'm like, man, what's Joe Burrow's worst wide receiving room look like? You know what I mean? Like, he went to strength to strength to strength because you look at that LSU tape, you're like, they had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and Terrence Marshall in there somewhere. Like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Just crazy.
It's tough to say because a lot of people have a theory that they're going to try to get Jettas, but I don't know how that's going to work because Jettas is probably going to get paid very soon. And I'm imagining that he's not going to take pennies on a dollar to come to Cincinnati to play with Jamar and Joe whenever that is down the road. It might be like after that, if something goes wrong, maybe like on a 1-year prove it deal or something like that. But that we're talking like 5-6 years from now. I think that would be a possibility if that were the case. But I think with Joe, the worst wide receiver core that I saw him with was probably his rookie year because AJ Green, I think, went down, I believe, during like the preseason or not even the preseason, in training camp, right? And this is AJ Green after he had already missed almost like 2 years.
That was like, AJ Green.
He didn't really know the offense.
Because he
didn't really know the offense. They didn't really have chemistry. So, like, you know, a lot of the stuff that he was looking for, they just weren't on the same page, right? And then AJ himself, he just wasn't that same guy that he generally had been before that. And then you had T. Higgins, who at first wasn't even playing. Like, a lot of people forget that. Like, T. Higgins didn't play, I think, until week 2 or 3. And then it became apparent that T. Higgins was like the best receiver. But before that, he just had like a bunch of guys. And then there was Tyler Boyd that he had a slightly good connection with. And then after that, then he got Jamar Chase, right? And then he had to turn up. But like I saw him do some amazing things with those guys because the narrative after we had the 3 guys and went to the Super Bowl, everybody was like, oh, he's just good because of his weapons. And I'm like, nah, dog. I remember seeing him out there with Auden Tate, all right, and like some other guys that weren't that good, and he was still doing his thing. But if you had to say between LSU and here, it is tough. I would just say the Bengals just because I think Tyler Boyd beats out Terrence Marshall, like in that case. But I still think that it's very close between those 2.
Yeah, man. Yeah, what it must be like to be Jamar Chase.
Jamar Chase was asking for Terrence Marshall during that draft. Like when Terrence Marshall was falling, he like wrote out a tweet in all caps like, "Let's go get Terrence Marshall."
What is it like to be Jamar Chase? You walk into LSU, fresh out of high school, right? And it's you and Derek Stingley Jr., both true freshmen, just come in, best player, best player at your position in college, right? All of a sudden, you just walk in from high school, best player in the nation at your position. Take a year off, just show up at an NFL field, look to your left, see T. Higgins, look to your right and see Tyler Boyd. I mean, I believe Tyler Boyd's been to a Pro Bowl, right? Like he's been a Pro Bowler before. And you not only walk in there as like the 4th pick, you walk in there And immediately they're like, nah, he's better than us. That's crazy. Like I don't know what it must be like to be Jamar Chase, but it must be good because like I ain't never been that good at something.
I think what it was I think so like a lot of people went back and forth on it. And I remember when it happened because they was like, who's wide receiver one? Who's wide receiver one? To me, it's more of like you have almost two wide receiver ones with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And then you have like one of the best slots in the league in Tyler Boyd. And I think the one thing that they liked was once they added Uno to the mix, he was more flexible than AJ was. So they could move him in and out of the slot. They could move guys around. And I think for him, they already knew like the advantage was he already played with Joe Burrow, right? Like they already knew where each other and like the last quarterback he played with was Joe Burrow, like because Jamar ended up sitting out, right? Even though he wanted to play. But I think Uno, even though he's confident, he's still super respectful. Like he was respectful of T, like trying to learn from him. He was respectful of Tyler Boyd. And Tyler Boyd kind of went from being a guy that was like the young guy in the locker room to kind of having to be the vet. Like he's the guy that, you know, when they go out to the club, TB's getting the sections, he's making sure that they're good, he's making sure that they're safe and all of that. He kind of like protects those guys and takes them under the wing. And, you know, I kind of knew that about Tyler Boyd just because doing heavy research on him. Like he grew up rough in Pittsburgh, but he was always a team guy. Like he was a team guy to the point that he played baseball, dog, to help his team win a championship. And he don't even like baseball, but he was like, you know what? They need a championship here for Pittsburgh or where. No, it wasn't even Pittsburgh because he's actually from a smaller area within PA. But he was like, you know, I'm gonna just put the team on my back. So he's always been kind of that guy, and T has kind of also been one of those guys. It's kind of weird to say that they're kind of like humble, but this was like we go from one extreme of like Chad Johnson to AJ Green, who's like a super humble guy, like no big ego. And then you bring in a guy like Uno who's confident, but he's more thinking about because I was at LSU, because I was with Joe and we did this thing where Jettas was eating and Terrace Marshall was eating, like we can do the same thing here. And I remember his dad talking to me because a lot of people got upset about that. And that's what made this picture so significant is that a lot of people were trying to rip them apart. They were like, oh, Jamar's wide receiver one. No, T. Higgins is wide receiver one. No, it should be Tyler Boyd and this and that. And he kept saying, like, everybody's gonna eat. Like, this is just like LSU. Like Jamar went off, then Justin Jefferson started to get it off, then Terrace Marshall was getting off. It's like it's not about one guy having more targets than the other. It's about them all eating. And I think when I came out with this, it was big because instead of people separating them, it kind of grouped them together. And so it kind of like helped dispel that narrative of this guy is better than this guy is better than this guy. And then it's just like, damn, now we're looking at the best receiving core in the league because it's like, how do you stop either one of these guys? It's just crazy.
Denzel Ward. But that that would be.
I will give it, and that's one of the like. It's funny because I ended up changing my order, but originally before we went on the show, like until they had talked through all of those things, I had the Browns at number one. I had the Browns at number one because I was like, bro, this was the only team secondary that showed any signs outside of the Broncos. The Broncos did a good job too. I can't take anything away from them, but I think those two cornerback rooms were the only ones I think that season that gave the Migos any kind of issues. And I think that they've said that. Like a lot of people take the clips and throw them on social media, but if you really listen to the whole interview, it's them saying like, nah, Denzel is like the best corner. It's not Marlon Humphrey. It's not this and that. It's like, and he even shouted out Greg Newsome. He's like, yeah, like they take that as a challenge because most of the secondary, they were just running through them, bro. So it's like a challenge for them because they know that they're going against one of the best secondaries and cornerback rooms in Cleveland. And so now I think they said they talked some trash to him or something like that. So there's that. But I think that there's definitely a mutual respect for Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome and those guys over there.
I mean, when you put up 40 and they only put up, 20? I mean, there's going to be some trash talk, you know. And you at their crib, it's just going to be that, you know. Yeah. And that's just, boy, I think Denzel said at the Pivot podcast, it was just that kind of game. It was just that kind of game, we just had to. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, the Browns, they added MJ, and MJ looks good. Like, I think MJ is probably going to be able to contribute year one and probably step up and do something. And that's going to be a nice clash there on Monday Night Football to see how that holds up, because I think the secondary's gotten better, safety and cornerback wise, and it'd be interesting to see, can they repeat that again? Because you want to talk about performances that will put you on the map if you're the Cleveland Browns defense, because a lot of people still don't believe in them, is if you put together a great defensive performance on Monday Night Football against one of the best offenses in football with one of the best quarterbacks there. I mean, that'd be one that gets them talking, right? So, hey, as much as the Bengals, I know they got that circle, right? Because Joe been wanting to get it back on the Browns for like 2 years now. And Jamar.
It's funny because I was telling certain people in spaces, because I talked to Jamar's dad a lot, and he was like, I remember after the Browns game, he was upset because I think he said Greg Newsome said that he shut him down or something like that. And he was like, he wanted to actually get his revenge in the second game, but that was the game where they just put him in for like a series. And so I had already known Jamar had that game circled, and I was like, all right, well, we probably not gonna hear about this until like game week. And then it was like the interview happens and Jamar
he could not wait. It's been boiling. I could tell when he said it, he was shaking. I was like, oh man, he wanted to get this off his chest. Somebody said something that bugged him. But yeah, it's yeah, and it's like if he says he shuts you down, you don't feel like he shut you down, but he's the only one that held you under 100 yards.
But
all you can do is play.
Look at the box score. It's like that's why I think he wants to have another opportunity at it. But I think that those dudes, it's gonna be like the Joe Hayden, AJ Green. It's gonna be a battle. But Marlon Humphrey might want that smoke back. Like I said this like. Yes, Chase put 200 on his head, but that is all that Marlon Humphrey heard this whole offseason, dog. And Marlon Humphrey, I think, gonna want some smoke too as well to get his reputation back.
And Marlon Humphrey chokes people, so be careful. You know what I mean? Like Marlon Humphrey don't play them games like everybody else. But he don't talk trash. He one of them dudes that just start fighting. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I mean, like I think it's a great position for football fans of the AFC North to be in, to just gonna be so much great matchups and so many great football things to watch this year that it's just a blessing whether your team's gonna be Super Bowl contending or not. I feel like, man, like Myles Garrett, this defense versus the Bengals offense 2 times a year, that's crazy. Seeing Lamar Jackson versus Joe Burrow 2 times a year, like that's going to be crazy. I mean, like when we get into the later part of the season plus next year.
Are we going to see Lamar Jackson twice this year? I don't know. Are we?
I mean.
Are we going to see him at Odyssey? I don't know. We're still hammering out the details on that one.
I feel like you'll see him this season. The question is, are we going to trade those 2 games with Lamar for 2 games with Deshaun? You know what I
mean? Don't kill me.
This ain't the place where they going to be mad about Deshaun leaving. You know what I mean? This ain't Ravens Nation over here. This is a little different. We've been talking about Lamar might be leaving for a little bit over here. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, like, then you're going to add Deshaun into the mix. It's going to be one of the most
interesting facing Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. It's going to get real interesting. I can't wait.
The word from Pittsburgh is Kenny Pickett is Drew Brees 2.0.
Let's find out.
Yeah, what I mean? Can't wait to see him against a real defense. But, we'll see what happens there. But again, Ace, thank you for coming on. You can check Ace out at the Cincinnati Podcast. It's both on Spotify and on YouTube. It's just Cincinnati. Get rid of the C. Add the W, because that's just how they feeling now. I guess they got Joe Burrow there. It's just W's all over the place. Cincinnati Podcast. You can also check them out on AFC North Talk with yours truly and Tony Serino, Sonny, and Ace Boogie, right? So if you want to check out AFC North Talk, check him out there. He also has New Stripe City, his own channel. Check him out. All those places. My man working a lot of jobs on this YouTube grind. And also check him out on Twitter. It's New Stripe City on Twitter, right?
Yes, sir. Trying to
Miss
get
Tri
like you,
City.
man. Trying to get like you.
You got more followers than me on Twitter.
Barely, barely, barely.
I mean, you sold them shirts. You was on the news. You got that boost. You know what I mean? I need to start selling shirts. That's what I need to
Yes,
do.
sir.
Right. Again, Ace, thank you for coming on. Make sure you check out Ace's stuff. Everybody else, y'all have a great day. Have a good night.
Thank you, sir.